Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports. I even saw your reaction to that. Shehan, man, they just can't get out of their own way, can they, the Aggies?
Yeah, you start to feel bad for them a little bit. I mean, it's been over and over, especially this year. And, obviously they weren't all that excited about Texas coming into the SEC, but for Texas to come in, immediately have success in football, immediately have success in women's basketball, immediately have success in so many other key sports, win the SEC in baseball, like it's got to be so tough to watch right now as Texas A&M, who came into the year in so many of these sports with high expectations, just continue to fall continuously on their face.
What do you think their hang up is with football in particular, since that's a sport you cover? Like, part of it is the reason I think some of the other sports cover is they like sacrifice some of that for football, which nobody has put more money into football and gotten less out of it than Texas A&M.
It's a good question. I think that there's a couple pieces to it, right? Like, I think that one, I actually really like the hire of Mike Elko. I think that he kind of gets back to their roots, but I do feel like during the Kevin Sumlin era and even into the Jimbo Fisher era, you felt like Texas A&M was kind of getting away from who they are. Obviously I grew up in the state of Texas in DFW, and Texas A&M, one, is an underdog, and two, is a blue-collar place. So where all of a sudden you go and you all of a sudden are the school of swag copters and Kevin Sumlin and Johnny Manziel, like it never quite fit to me. And then you bring in Jimbo Fisher, who obviously is a coach who frankly was like seen as beyond reproach in many cases because of the contract that he signed and because of the attention he brought. Well, I felt like Mike Elko was a little bit of going back. He reminded me a lot of the R.C. Slocum hire, a guy who's a defensive coordinator, just a football coach, going to really instill some toughness. Now, again, you didn't necessarily see it in year one the entire season, but I do think long-term that's going to make a lot of sense. But, the other thing too is that especially when you look at that 2022 recruiting class, of course, they have the number one class of all time that season. I think that there was so much focus on trying to project something out to the world that there wasn't as much regard for what does this team need? What does this roster need? How do we get the most out of these players? And you look at so many of the players in that class, they had their best seasons after they left Texas A&M. So I think getting back to more of a blue-collar mindset, a developmental mindset, and still being able to do it with 5 stars makes a lot of sense. I actually made the comparison whenever they hired Colin Klein as their offensive coordinator. I think the best thing that Texas A&M could be that would fit right within their identity and right within the culture of that place is beat Kansas State with 5 stars, right? They hire Colin Klein as their offensive coordinator from Kansas State, of course. I think that has the potential to be a perfect fit if they're willing to see it through.
Shehan, I saw that when glanced at your time, I just kind of see what you've been talking about. And Utah, you were on a podcast talking about the Utes, and we were talking about Big 12 championship odds and things like that earlier. Where is Utah in terms of entering the 2025 season in your head? We know where they were in everybody's heads last year. We were all drastically wrong about where we thought they were actually going to be. But what have you made of their offseason? And are you as down in the dumps on them as some are, or you think there's going to be a little bit of a resurgence this year?
Yeah, they're maybe the toughest program to project in the Big 12 for me next year. I mean, other than the sort of Colorado conversation, but because look, defensively, this is a great program. I don't know if they're going to be as good defensively as they were last year, but they should still be a top 3 defense in the Big 12. And offensively, I mean, they've got some incredible pieces. Their tackles, Caleb Lomu and Spencer Fano, are maybe the best combination in all of college football. I've seen some places project both as top 15 NFL draft picks. So you add that aspect. You add, of course, they bring in Devin Dampier, the quarterback from New Mexico, along with his offense coordinator, Jason Beck. The big question to me is going to be, what is his upside as a passer? If he's an average Big 12 passing quarterback, I mean, look, he was a 1,000-yard rusher at New Mexico as well. So I think that that's going to give them a little bit of a higher floor than before. And again, I mean, look, when you look at the past 2 years, it wasn't just down offense. It wasn't just inconsistent quarterback play. It was some of the worst offense and quarterback play in the entire country. So I do think that there is the upside for them to get back into that Big 12 conversation. Right now, I have them in that middle class of the Big 12, kind of that third tier maybe of teams that are certainly good enough to make it a little bit higher in the conference, but you just can't project them there at this point. But again, it's going to come down to how quickly can that offense come along and how ready is Devin Dampier as a passer.
Shehan, there's 16 teams, and I don't know how many tiers you mentioned, maybe the third tier. Are there 4 tiers? Which of the tiers in this bipolar conference is the deepest, has the most teams in it? Those who we think are going to be pretty good, those right on the edge, those who we have no idea about, and those who we think are not going to be good at all.
Lily was falling 10 times a day, covered in bruises. She would run just straight into a pole, right? It was a disaster. She would fall down the stairs all the time. She just could not navigate her environment. 8 weeks after starting functional mushrooms, she was assessed developmental age for physical therapy and no longer required that service.
Thanks for joining us today. That's a wrap.
Peace, love, and mushrooms.
Peace, love, and mushrooms. Rashad, you got me.
GetUmbo.com.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, it's probably that second tier, right? Because you have some of the contenders at the top. I think that you put Arizona State in that group. I think that you put Texas Tech with what they've done this offseason. I think Baylor is a really good case. But like that second group of teams that has a chance to move up is so big. I mean, you're talking about both of the Kansas schools. You're talking about Iowa State off of what they did last year. I think that Utah is right on the cusp of that conversation. And again, I mean, that doesn't even get into the TCUs, for example, who won 9 games last year. There's so many teams that are maybe half a step from me outside of that contender conversation. But that's what makes it so tough. Again, because you look last year, I mean, again, I mentioned a team like Colorado. Obviously, I don't know if they're going to be able to replicate a 9-win season, but like if they are anywhere close to that, they could once again get into this conversation. Again, like we've seen teams that obviously have some upside. I think about a team like Oklahoma State, who last year obviously has a really miserable year. Well, they bring back some guys and have a really good transfer class. So like, I think that tier 2 has to be the deepest of the group, because again, once you get into tier 3 and tier 4, like I think you're talking about a relatively small number of teams. I mean, that 4th tier, especially of teams that are bad. I mean, it's UCF probably, it's Arizona probably. And other than that, I don't know that anybody is firmly there. So I think that tier 2 is the tier of strivers. And I think that ultimately you're potentially looking at 6 or 7 teams in that group.
Which team do you think that in the middle of it has the most questions? Is it Colorado? Because quarterback, actually, I think Caden Salter and Julian Lewis, like whatever works out there was probably going to be fine for them. It's just they just lost a generational player and some superb athletes around him.
Yeah, I think what makes Colorado so confusing is that the last 2 years, and I think you could even go back even a little earlier than that at Jackson State, Deion Sanders' teams have been built around doing one thing, and that's featuring his sons and Travis Hunter. And, last year, obviously, they throw the ball a whole ton. They throw the ball to Travis Hunter a whole ton to try to get him the stats to win the Heisman Trophy. And obviously, they have a really good year. They win 9 games. Well, now all of a sudden, because like you said, Caden Salter comes in. I think he's a solid quarterback. Julian Lewis is a really talented young player. But it's probably not going to be Shedeur Sanders, at least right away. And the other piece of this, too, is they have a good wide receiver room, but they don't have a Travis Hunter in that room. Somebody's going to, be one of the best receivers in the country, not even getting into, obviously, what he does on the defensive side of the ball. So what's fascinating to me is that this is probably going to look more like a real traditional football team. And I think that the most underrated aspect of this team is on defense. I mean, their defense coordinator, Robert Livingston, I think is a rising star in this industry. He became the highest paid assistant coach in Colorado history this offseason. They've got a good defensive line. They've got some pieces at linebacker and in the defensive backfield. So, potentially that allows them to have a floor that gets them into the bowl conversation. Then obviously on the offensive side, again, it's going to be, does somebody emerge at running back? For the second straight year, they're losing their top rusher. They're losing so many of their top receivers. Their offensive line never truly came together, though at least many of them are back. So it's just going to be something completely new when Colorado takes the field in 2025. And I think that's what makes it so complicated, is there really is no pathway to them being able to replicate exactly the kind of football that they played in 2024.
So we know that there's very little room for slipping up if you're the Big 12. You got to be pretty close to perfect to ensure that you get maybe the maximized potential spots. And we know last year, just the one playoff spot everybody's worried about. How big is the non-con, Shehan? Like, people are downplaying the significance of the regular season, but you've got games like Baylor and Auburn. You got TCU, North Carolina, Cincy, Nebraska, Colorado, Georgia Tech. Not the biggest, hugest matchups in the world, but how important is that non-con for the Big 12 in particular when you look at the bigger picture?
Well, I think that you probably can't play your way in to playoff spots in the non-conference, but I do think you can definitely play your way out of playoff spots in the non-conference. And, I think that we've talked about it before, but Baylor might have two of the most important games for the Big 12 next season, playing both Auburn, an SEC team, and SMU, a team that was in the college football playoff last year. Obviously, TCU also gets SMU. So I think that picking up a win there would be really, really important and could shape the seasons of both of those teams and maybe both of those conferences. So I think you need to have success. And here's the other piece too, is that, I think that I've been on the record. I feel like Big 12 teams were largely undervalued in 2024. Well, the way that you fix that is you win games against these other conferences. It just allows you the opportunity to build up some credibility, to have, even some bragging rights. One of the things that's very important to remember is that in the college football playoff selection process, they do compare results of mutual opponents. And so, again, if you're in a situation where whatever team, that SMU or Florida State or whoever is contending for a playoff spot with TCU, and you have that mutual North Carolina game, well, maybe that becomes a big deal when it's time to make playoff selection. So I think that sort of thing really matters. I think it's huge for the perception of the Big 12 as a conference. And the reality is, right, like, we can have all these teams that we feel quite good about, but until people believe that they can go out and compete with some of the best teams in the country, which, again, I think Arizona State proved that they could last year against Texas, you have to stack up those kinds of results in order to ultimately put yourself in a position to have multiple teams in the field.
How ironic is it? Your alma mater, speaking of Baylor, they used to have the worst non-conference schedule in America because they were terrible, and they wanted to try to get 4 wins in non-conference, win a couple of games, and get to a bowl game, right, in the Big 12. That this year they have 2 games that matter quite a bit, and it's been that way. They had Utah, Colorado, BYU before, not Colorado, but BYU and Utah before they got into the Big 12. How just for you refreshing is their non-conference schedule?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, right? Like, obviously, I came to school in 2012, and it was very recent that that Baylor was in a position where they wanted to play competitive games because bowl eligibility felt like something that was reasonable. And so I think it's huge, first of all, for Baylor that they are in this position, but it adds another level of pressure as well. I mean, again, 10 years ago, they were in a position where it was a fundamental structural flaw for that program to obviously be playing some of those non-conference games. Well, now they're in a position to be playing national matchups really early. And I really look at that Auburn game especially. It's a Friday night game. It's going to be a nationally televised game, national platform, really not up against anything else of value. And so if Baylor comes out and plays a great game, that's going to shape in a lot of ways the way that people view this team heading into the Big 12. And of course, like I mentioned, also shape the way that people see the Big 12 heading forward. So I think these are huge opportunities. Now, again, look, here's the reality too. Here's the downside of it, right? Is if you lose that game against Auburn and lose that game against SMU, first of all, you're probably already eliminated from the playoff before Big 12 play even really starts. And second, if you do go on or run the Big 12, it probably weighs down the valuation of your conference. So these are games that you have to deliver on. But I think it's really exciting that Baylor has stepped up to the plate and is willing to do it.
Shehan, do you think that we will get any kind of legal finality this week when it comes to the House settlement?
Yeah, we've been hearing some rumors that it could be coming in the next 24 to 48 hours. Now, look, last week we got the final filings, and at this point, it's in the hands of Judge Claudia Wilken. She will ultimately have the ability to say whether she approves of the settlement or whether she doesn't. Of course, the last thing that she really brought to the table was the idea that she wanted to have a little bit more clarity over grandfathering in players on roster so that there wouldn't just have to be a mass cutting of players to get under that 105 roster limit. So that's the last piece that really has to be worked out. She has to file through some of the objections that have been filed as well by some of the outside parties. So again, we're in a position now where we think it might be coming in the next couple of days. But again, ultimately, the legal system works on its own timeline. And we came to court for the final settlement on April 7th. It's still not done as yet. So you can never be too sure about anything.
Yeah, I get in just reading the tea leaves that they expect Judge Wilkin to fire something off this week before Memorial Day weekend. And then again, I don't know what it means. Do we get to celebrate or we just go, oh God, this now means this or that? I don't know, but it does seem like this is the week. And I hope to God it is, don't you? That we can, I don't know if we can move on though, because there might be other things that splinter off whatever the decision is.
Well, I think that what is most complicated for any college football program about this moment is that everybody is planning for July 1st to be the moment that they can opt into Revshare. So like teams are already raising this money. Players are already signing contracts. There kind of isn't a contingency plan if this doesn't happen. Because look, let's just say that it gets rejected and they don't have the settlement done before that July 1st deadline. Well, like, again, that's $20 million that's been allocated within the athletic department. You can't necessarily just move all that money to external factors. You know, that's not really how it works. And so you end up in a position where potentially you're screwing players over with contracts that can't be enforceable. And now I will say, as far as I've heard, every Revshare contract has language in it that clarifies this is dependent on the idea of House v. NCAA being settled. But certainly you'd be in a position where you have a lot of really unhappy players and maybe an untenable situation if this doesn't get resolved. So certainly I think that everybody wants this to be complete just from that perspective so that we can at least take that first step. And look, there's going to be new challenges and new lawsuits and all this sort of stuff after this happens as well. But at least this gives us a first framework to move into the pay-for-play era. And at least once we get there, we can deal with some of the other issues.
How long did you, before you put out the top 16 or 1 through 16 power poll, how long did you like sit on that or have to go back and tweak it a little bit? You've written many articles in your lifetime and you just want to make sure it's just right. Was it hard to just say, okay, no, damn it, this is it?
Well, the first thing that I did was I put it together without really thinking too hard about it, I guess, right? Like I did it more off of the top of my head. Then, I went through, obviously kind of clarified it a bit by looking at some other projections and stuff. I compared it to the Vegas odds. I mean, just to see where I was at. And by the way, FanDuel had Utah way higher than just about anybody else that I've seen at this point. But, again, the first thing that you want to do when you put together a rankings like this is making sure you're doing your due diligence, because you don't want to forget something dumb because everybody's going to notice it if you do. But the other thing too is, again, there are going to be teams that you're wrong about. That's just reality. I picked Arizona State last place last year, but you want to make sure that you have a clear logic for yourself, at least, that, hey, this is what I like about this team. This is what I don't like about this team. This is the questions that I have. I tend to take it from more of, I guess I would consider a 50th percentile look at teams as opposed to what's their ceiling and what's their floor. And so as long as you know that you have kind of this logic to how you're approaching things, you can live with the results.
Yep, absolutely. And who knows, with the way the history is, it could be completely flipped before it's all said and done. Last year was a great example. Thank you, Shehan. Have a great day. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports with